Yo everyone, before the video begins, just wanted to let you know that I'm making a new channel. It's going to be centered around NFL and potentially NBA content. If you didn't know, I am a big-time sports head, and I want to explore that passion in the form of content creation. And no, this does not mean I'm leaving you guys and I'm done with OWL. I simply just want to explore some of my other passions, that's all. So if you want to support me or you're interested in that kind of content, it would mean a lot to me if you could drop the channel a sub. Anyway, now on to the video. Overrated, underrated, or properly rated, Part 4 Pro Overwatch Edition, baby. We're back for another installment. I asked the wonderful people on my YouTube community tab to name off players and teams from past or present for me to give a take on and to describe if I believe this community underrates, overrates, or properly rates said person or team. Also, I'd like to apologize if I didn't get to your question. There are a lot of them, and there's only so many I can answer in a video without it getting too long. So if you made the cut, congratulations. And there's also a possibility that I may have answered your player or team in the past. So definitely check out the link in the description. I'm going to have a playlist to all of the other overrated, underrated, properly rated videos, and there's a chance that you might get your answer in one of those ones. And getting into things, first up we have Shockwave, a player who has been around the OWL scene since Season 3, yet isn't talked about enough as I think he should be. Yeah, Shockwave's a pretty interesting one. Overall, I don't really have any problems with him. I don't think a lot of people hate on him or overrate him for that matter. He's more so just forgotten to time to the simple fact that a lot of the teams that he's played on throughout the years just haven't been relevant. He joined Titans post-Runaway. He went to the Fusion where he suffered from visa issues. He came back to the Titans just to have more issues with them. And now here in the present, he plays on albeit a decent NYXL team, but nothing out of the ordinary. In spite of that though, I think a lot of people still appreciate what Shockwave brings to the table. They have a lot of good memories of him on the Ekko and carrying that sorry excuse for a Titans team in 2020. They remember the good stuff that he's done on the NYXL recently, being their closer on map 5s, being a solid 6-man and rotational player. I believe that Shockwave is most certainly properly rated. Next we have Fitz. Over the past 4 years, he's been a beast for Seoul, and right now he's low-key putting in the work for New York. The most underrated hit scan in the league for years. And yeah, to a certain extent, I think I do agree with you. Fitz a lot of the time has lived in other people's shadows, despite being a very consistent player that was on the Dynasty since 2019. They worked with this guy, they helped build up his confidence, and develop him into a pretty solid player. Like, from the end of Season 3 until the present, he has been one of the more reliable hit scans in the Overwatch League. And a lot of people sadly talked a lot of smack on him and said that he'd get exposed over in the West, and it's good to see that he still held his own, and to a certain extent he has proved those people wrong. Fitz is one of those people who has a lot of haters, but also a lot of lovers to defend him, and I kind of think that it evens out. In my personal opinion, he probably deserves a bit more appreciation, but on the grand scheme of it all, I'd say due to the significant number of both haters and lovers that he is definitely properly rated. Next is EQO. He's my favorite player all time, and I feel like people only talk about that one Genji clip whenever he's brought up. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to say that. A lot of people these days just remember that, but that's mostly because it is a great memory more than anything else. That is one of the most exciting plays in the history of the Overwatch League, and I think it's great that he's recognized for it. However, I also do agree that he was pretty good in other seasons. 2018 in particular, he was actually that missing piece for that Fusion squad that pushed them over the top and gave them that reliable DPS duo that Carpe needed to eventually get pushed to the Grand Finals that year. Sometimes people are quick to forget that EQO was pretty versatile. In 2018, when Tracer was hard meta, he could sometimes go onto that hit scan and be a reliable Widowmaker, or a solid Cassidy, while Carpe did the rest on the Tracer. And he showed he can play Pharah, and he could pick up Hanzo during that playoff meta, and he could even do a little bit of Ekko. This guy was all over the place, but I often think that he gets forgotten to time because, one, he was never a superstar player. There are a lot of other flex DPS players throughout the years. But two, the Fusion just have a lot of household names, so sometimes he kind of just gets lost in the crowd. So for that, I'll say that, albeit slightly, EQO is underrated. Halo31 says, Mono. He seems to be a consistent, reliable main tank throughout his career. And I mean, yeah, there's really not much that I can add on here that you haven't already said. I think most people realize that this guy was one of the best ever. Never quite number one, but I think we all kind of understand that he is one of the best tank players to ever touch the game. No one really thinks he's overrated or underrated. I'd say that the community generally does a good job with this guy. And it's for the simple fact that he is a super consistent player who was really good on Winston and Ryan from the moment that he stepped into the league until the moment that he left. And on the NYXL in particular, I think it's really cool that he was able to play as well as he did, despite not getting a lot of the resources. Those things were often focused on Jonak and people like Pine and the DPS. It wasn't really about Mono, and yet he still produced at a superstar level anyway, and sometimes I wonder what could have happened if he played on a team like the Titans or the Shock, who put a bit more focus on their tanks. But overall, I'd say properly rated. Next we have Nathan, who asks, Yaki. I've never felt like he's really been a special player for any team he's been in. I mean, no offense here, Nathan, but I disagree with you completely. 2020 Yaki was that dude. He was a special player, and that was a solid rookie campaign that he output that year. He was one of the best tracers and overall flex DPS in the entire game, and he was the reason, the driving point behind 2020 Florida having such a good season and making a decent playoff run. However, it oftentimes gets overshadowed by a lot of the stuff that has happened in the modern day in the last couple of years. His second year on Mayhem was kind of a flop, but it definitely was not his fault. This dude carried to the maximum, and it was more so just other issues like with tank and whatnot, and even main support. And then in 2022, and this year as well, he just hasn't been on the right team, and I think Gladiators in particular, maybe not the best meta for him. At this point in his career, he's really not that good anymore. That's very true. At this point, he's not a star level player, but to say that he was never a special player may be taking it a bit too far. But overall, when you balance everything out, I'd say that he is properly rated. Now we have Happy. His career has been a roller coaster of ratings, and now he's considered one of the best DPS in the league. But he used to be beyond inconsistent. I'm curious to know what you think about him, along with the public opinion on him. I mean, it's true. Everything you said here is very, very true. Happy's career has seen a lot of ups and downs. Super exciting prospect always from the moment that he stepped into the league. He showed off some insane potential and mechanics, but sometimes he did have a habit of disappearing, and this lasted for quite a few years. Honestly, it wasn't really something that he fixed until Overwatch 2 came out. His first 3 years, nobody could really take him seriously just because he'd always tease you with the flashes just to disappear in the most important moments, but these days he definitely has it figured out. He is rightfully one of the best DPS players in the game, probably a role star, maybe even an MVP candidate. He is an excellent player, and I think at this point he has his problem fixed. It's been 2 years, he showed us that he is beyond that at this point, and people are finally praising him. I think it's great, and he's properly rated because of it. Okay, next we have an interesting one. Technically, I did not say anything about coaches in my question, but this is a good exception just because Krusty actually has been a pretty hot talking point in the community lately. So we're going to talk about him and the supposed crack pipe. So I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off here. Everyone who's on the anti-Krusty agenda is going to absolutely slaughter me in the comment section. But I think it's ridiculous that people are saying that Krusty is like the most overrated coach of all time. The crack pipe stuff that's happening now is ridiculous. It's super sad. I won't lie to you. The Shock team was supposed to be something more, and he does deserve some of the blame. But people are taking it way too far and are completely forgetting about some of the great stuff that he did during his early tenure in the Overwatch League. Are we really going to sit here and forget all about Boston in the inaugural season? That team was supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league, according to experts, and Krusty helped take them to a 10-0 stage, and he was a big reason why they were able to get the 3 seed in the Overwatch League playoffs with one of the best records in the league. And after stage 3, he joined the Shock, and a lot of people are all of a sudden saying that he had all the talent in the world and he had to sit back and do absolutely nothing. And for some reason, people are forgetting that some of these guys were very raw at the time and he helped develop them into something, at least to a certain extent. Like, super as amazing as he ended up being, he was not that great during the early stages of GOATS. The early weeks of Stage 1, his Reinhardt stats were subpar. You don't think that Krusty had at least a little bit to do with that turnaround and eventually helping him become the best Reinhardt ever? And what about Ant? Sure, he was talented, but he didn't really have any experience at the professional level before outside of some minor contenders things. That takes some coaching and discipline to get him on the right track to be in that position to succeed. It doesn't just happen overnight. The coaching to a certain extent is going to help with a developmental piece like that. And look what Ants ended up becoming. Like, I just think it's unrealistic to say that Krusty had nothing to do with that success. And yeah, sure, he'd end up getting proper in 2022, but still, he had to rebuild that team from the ground up. He established a new team around him with a bunch of people that you didn't know was going to work or not, and they ended up making the grand finals that year. Krusty just has a history of success wherever he goes, and the one year where things don't go well for him, all of a sudden he's the most overrated coach ever. I just don't understand. Fatty Matty Who Is Ratty says, Ben Best. Some people love him and some people hate him, and I wonder how Mr. ATP himself feels about him. I'm probably gonna collectively piss off the entire French fanbase when I say this, and I apologize in advance, but I've never really seen the hype with Ben Best. He's always been okay, but sometimes I feel like people try and make him out to be something that he's just not. When has he really been a significant contributor on a team, especially outside of like a Reinhardt meta? I think 2019 Paris was a disaster. 2020, he definitely showed some improvement and looked like a lot more of a reliable starter. His Orisa and Ryan were good. I have no problem with it. But he also played on a team with Hanbin and Fielder and Sparkle and Exy, and I've just never really seen him prove himself, like, truly as a leader type of player. And now he's benched for Mirror, who, while I think has been good, does not have nearly as much tank experience overall when you look at their history. The fact that Ben Best still can't really be a consistent contributor or starter is a telltale sign to me that he's mostly just good at Rhine and maybe a little bit of Overwatch 1 Orisa. And yet some people still make it out like he was a really amazing player, like on 2020 Eternal, for example. I've just never seen it that way, so my verdict is overrated, but very handsome. Speaking of French players, Stingy String says soon. He was a legend of the game, but his legacy has kind of been forgotten over time. I freaking love Soon, and I'm not just saying that because, again, former Valiant bias. I really think Soon throughout his entire career, pre-Overwatch League, all the way until the very end, was excellent, and I'd argue that he is the greatest French player of all time. Soon developed a reputation as a really famous player with the Soon chants, as well as being one of the sneakiest tracers around. Not to mention that he's been a reliable hit scan and DPS for the entirety of his career, pre-OWL all the way until he decided to retire. And I think just because it's been so many years and DPS is so chock full of amazing people that sometimes he kind of just goes forgotten. It can be very easy to forget about some of the early years of the Overwatch League just because it has been so long and we've seen the game evolve and mechanics evolve and these new amazing DPS like Proper have kind of come in and taken his place. It's a bit difficult to remember. But I think in spite of that, Soon has always held his own, and he's even been a legendary player for the French national team on more than one occasion. And on Rogue before, he was also really good. Soon, from start to finish in his career, was just somebody you could respect, and because of the evolving game and how constantly it's changing, and how many years it has been, I think people often forget about his greatness, so I'll say that Soon is underrated. Booming Bob, a famous Shanghai fan around these parts, is saying Viper, and I'm gonna get straight to the point and say that I definitely think he is a tad bit underrated. It's not necessarily because people don't recognize its skill, but I think it's more so because he plays in APAC, which is the less popular region, and he plays on a Dragons team, which is just never going to get any sort of national attention. When you look at a lot of the Shanghai games in which they had any sort of chance in, or they won for that matter, Viper was usually a driving force behind their success. He was primarily known as like a Genji player before joining Overwatch League, but he quickly has developed a solid tracer, and he's probably one of the better DPS players out there, and quite honestly is one of those shouts you you have to make for Rookie of the Year. He's probably not going to win it because, again, plays in APAC, plays on a Shanghai team that's just not that successful, but individually the talent has definitely been there, and in a rookie class that hasn't been that great, he's definitely been one of the shining stars of it. So I'd say that Viper, as arguably the best player on the Dragons, but still not going super noticed, is underrated. Frailty says Masa. Yeah, Masa's a good one. He's somebody who has had an up and down career. In 2019, he was probably one of the better Lucio players in the game, a super impactful Lucio in GOATs, but then in 2020, as the meta evolved and more Brigitte became relevant, he kind of lost his touch. He became pretty mid, and at one point even got replaced by Fire on main support. Yeah, I said that right. You heard me correct. Fire started over him at one point. So there were moments in time where Masa was on the down, and I think that kind of goes into 2022 as well on Vancouver when he was kind of already on his way out, but I think his ups are more impressive, and he's also the all-time leader when it comes to environmental kills, so that kind of goes to show you just how amazing he really was at having an impact on a role that usually doesn't get looked at super seriously. Verdict, underrated. Next is Gosu. I think he's a super divisive player, and public consensus on him is always changing. And you're definitely right there. And I think it's for the simple fact that, one, he's maybe not the most flexible player in the world, but two, coming into the Overwatch League, there were some pretty great things expected of him. What he did in the World Cup and a little bit beforehand on the Winston generated some serious hype, and joining an expansion team like the Spark that also got a lot of attention, he was expected to be a pretty solid tank player, and for the most part, I think he has fulfilled those expectations. I mean, in his first year, he was a Rookie of the Year candidate and an MVP candidate. He was one of the greatest Winston players of all time, and then we saw that translate into 2022, where it looked like for a while, maybe he was on his way out, hadn't really been the same impactful player for a couple of years, but then he came alive again towards the end of the season and in the playoffs, and showed one of the most dominant Winston statistically, and still some insane primals that pretty much nobody can match outside of very few. Whenever the lights are at their brightest, whenever his team needs him the most, you can always count on Gosu to show up. He's one of the best Chinese players of all time, and I think most people respect him for his efforts, so I'd say, in spite of the ups and downs, that Gosu is properly rated. And lastly, we're going with Fish in a Bucket, who says Sparkle. Seems like people are underrating him. It really depends on the context here. If you're talking about Sparkle this year in particular, I'd probably disagree with you. I think that Sparkle has gotten a lot of justified criticism for taking a step back in his play. Not all his fault because Dallas just aren't as good anymore, but you don't feel that same life with him as you have in previous seasons. Recently he's picked it up. I think his Tracer has come back to what it used to be for the most part. He looks a lot more comfortable out there, but let's not beat around the bush here. There's like 6 to 8 flex DPS in the league that you're likely taking over him bare minimum. I think it's justified to say that he has maybe fallen off a little bit. It's not to say that he's a washed up player and that he's garbage, it's just that the game has evolved, he hasn't really evolved totally with it, and other people have caught up to him and or surpassed him. He's still a good player, but like, he might not even be the second best flex DPS in his own region, let alone the entire league, you know? I mean, it's a different story if, let's say, we're talking about his career as a whole. In that case, we kind of know the legend that he has, and most people would say that he's properly rated when you look at his career as a whole. But just this year in particular, he's probably properly rated in my eyes. I can't really say that people are underrating him when he justifiably just hasn't been as good. And that's pretty much everything I have to say about Sparkle, so that wraps up episode 4. If you enjoyed it and you want to see another episode of this series relatively soon, do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of my future content. I would appreciate it a lot. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.